Hello and welcome to, what is the name of this? Writing Comics About Your Heritage panel here at MCAF FBDM, Festival de BD de Montréal. My name is Kim. I will be your moderator today for this panel. I work at Crossover Comics. I'm also an artist. I don't have a table this year, but it's not about me. It's about these lovely people right here. Yay! So I'm going to introduce our guests today using their own words or whatever they sent to the FBDM website. So Allan Matudio is our first artist here. Is a visual storyteller born and raised in Montreal by Filipino immigrants. His work addresses issues and experiences that relate to his identity as a Filipino Montrealer. His debut graphic novel, Kazama, will be tabled along with the zines and prints. Yeah. So, and then we have Belna Labudet from Chile. She's a social anthropologist and comic book writer, having lived her childhood on Easter Island, and after the culture shock of moving to live in a big city, she studied anthropology and wanted to tell stories that she is passionate about. She made the comic series on Easter Island history, Varua Rabbanui, The Spirits of Rabbanui, in 3 volumes, with the 4th one on its way. And then we have Kikuo Johnson, who's a cartoonist and illustrator born in Maui in 1981. Okay. His drawings and stories regularly appear in books, advertisements, periodicals, animation, and on the cover of The New Yorker. His illustrations have earned 2 gold medals from the Society of Illustrators, and his most recent graphic novella, No One Else, featured here, is a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. So if anybody has any juice there, let's get him to win. Johnson divides his time in drawing in Brooklyn, teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design, and playing the ukulele with his family in Hawaii. All right, so I just want to talk first to our guests here today. Please feel like you can speak freely. Nous sommes tous bilingues ici, for the most part, in Montreal. If you need to switch to French, we'll help you translate that to English. And the panel, like I said, is ultimately about you 3, so absolutely feel free to ask questions of each other outside of the questions that I'm asking, and converse amongst yourselves. I'm not here. Okay. And note for our audience, I'm going to save 15 minutes at the end for any Q&A you might have, so please save your questions, write them down, whatever you need, and you'll have a chance to speak to the authors. Yeah. All right. So, as you can see, we have all these books out here. I suppose these are sort of your best known works, I think, for the moment being. Can you tell us each, maybe take turns, tell us a little bit about each book, what it's about, and how it relates to your own heritage, whatever that might be and however you identify. Yeah.
I guess I could start.
Yeah.
So this is my book. It's called Kazama. It's the story of 2 travelers, Allison and Kia. They're navigating their cultural differences, although both Filipino, there's different Filipinos, depending on where you are in the islands, as they hunt down the manananggal, which is this creature over here. The manananggal is a kind of traditional folklore creature from the Philippines that I wanted to highlight. And yeah, my work is inspired by just me reconnecting with my heritage, as well as inspired by the work that I do here in Montreal as when it comes to working with the community. So I should have mentioned that in the bio. I actually do quite a lot of community work when I'm not illustrating. And just like being a tourist in the Philippines, like being Filipino and being a tourist in your country, you get like 2 really interesting perspectives, right? Because one situation you feel homely, but in another way it's also, you kind of feel like a stranger. So I didn't know if I should relate as a tourist or as a Filipino, or as a native Filipino at that point.
Diaspora,
yeah,
as they call it,
so,
diaspora.
I'm sure there's gonna be a deeper conversation later, but yeah, that's basically Kazama.
That's my copy. It's a full endorsement.
Well, I'm Berna. I'm from Chile. I was raised. All of my childhood, I raised in Easter Island. It was a very cultural shock for me to, from the very, very little island and with a very, very specific words and language, travel to Santiago, who is the capital of Chile, and learn Spanish. And also, it's from a population from 1,000 people, a population to 8 million people. And for me, I wanna tell the stories about Easter Island, the story, the mythological one, and also the historical one, because when I talk with my classmates, nobody knows about Easter Island, nobody knows about the history, and I think it's very important to share the sad one story, but also a happy one, because not all the stories are sad, not all the stories are happy, and I want to talk with them about a story that I really, really cared. It's that.
It's fun that like this panel on heritage, it could actually be heritage from Pacific Islands.
Yes.
Like, it's very, very narrow. But I'm Kikuo. I was born in Maui, as Kim mentioned, and my latest book, No One Else, is a slice of life drama or dramedy, depending on how dark your sense of humor is. It's about a family grieving, lots of wordless passages, and also some dry humor. Yeah, and it's just about, when I was first writing it, I actually said it in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where I was briefly living at the time, and it wasn't until I kind of put it back on Maui that it became very real. The people became my neighbors, my family. It's a fictional story, but it became very real, so that seems pertinent to the heritage conversation.
Awesome, yay. So Berna and Kikuo, you kind of wrote about places that you grew up in, right? Like Maui, Easter Island. Mm-hmm. How did you end up deciding to choose? Like, why did you switch from Massachusetts, sorry, I messed that up. And, why instead of doing Santiago, why did you choose Easter Island? Was there something you felt like you had to reflect or show, or like some sort of literature gap, or like what you saw out there that was missing? Or was it more of a write what you know sort of situation?
Interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's maybe both, because I think it's very different. Maybe Kikuo has the situation also, because it's very different to grow up in an island, and a very little island. I think for me, it was like there is no horizon. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, I see the sea, and it's very hard because I came to a city, a big city. There is no sea, mm-hmm. and there is no trees. There is no nothing. It's very different from when I grew up. And maybe the experience it's maybe a sort of alien experience for me, because the trees are different. I think I remember when I was a child, I took the fruits from my neighbors, and nobody noticed, nobody cares, and it's different in a city, and a big city make that, and it's a thief. And it's it's the fruits, for example, appartiennent à tous.
Oui.
C'est pour ça.
Collective.
Yeah, it's collective,
Mm-hmm.
and this type of experience, I think, I can relate with the experience of the
other artists.
Other artists, yes.
Kind of wanting to reconnect, or choosing it because you missed it, kind of like you missed the nostalgia, or you're something missing in you.
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Kikuo?
Yeah, I connect with that too. I've thought about this a lot. This is my third book. My first book was also set in Maui, and that was more of a memoir or nonfiction. It was like semi-fiction. And then my next book was actually Hawaiian Legends, and then this is kind of a slice of life story. And it's like I can't escape it. I keep going back to Maui. It's like, go back to that well. And I've thought about, I'm not actually sure why that is, but it's, I think a big part of it is that the stories that I'm really drawn to are family stories. The love stories I'm drawn to are stories about family and those responsibilities tempered with those relationships. And those are just stories. When I watch those movies or those themes, those are the ones that really move me more than like romantic love stories or other kinds of stories. And my family's still in Maui, and I grew up there, of course. And like that is, when I sit back and imagine family stories, they take place on Maui. I think that's probably the simplest way to describe it. And maybe another part of it, and listening to you describe the fruits, is like, growing up on Maui, it's like one of those places that is so, it's not like a place you see through the car window that you drive past. It's like, if there's a waterfall, you're in the waterfall, you're on the cliff, you're eating the fruit. And it's just, those memories are so visceral and vivid. So that might be part of it too. Yeah.
And Allan, despite your book, despite you growing up here and your book takes place in the Philippines, like, did you also feel like a similar draw or like a responsibility, but also like a desire to share something or discover something?
Definitely, like you guys touch upon a few points that I wanted to address in that. Sure, I grew up I'm born and raised in Montreal, specifically Côte des Neiges, right? Represent. But it's also writing Kazama allowed me to look deeper, not just in like my Filipino heritage, but also I was able to just talk with my family, right? So although in general it's set in like a kind of fake city, a lot of the visual references are from my dad's neighborhood or from my dad's town. So, and that's kind of how I pay homage to at least where he grew up, right? So yeah.
That's really interesting. I've heard that a lot from other, diaspora authors as well, where it's like, I just needed an excuse to talk to my parents, especially when you come from a very like immigrant, like nose to the grindstone, like just assimilate sort of family. So I think that's always really interesting. We were talking about the mythological aspects, like I'm going to say it wrong.
The manananggal. Yeah.
Yes, did I do it? Okay. The manananggal. And the sort of mythological, fantastical bit. Like, did you end up needing to do a lot of research? It's like you said you went back and looked through, I don't know, photos maybe of your dad's like...
Well, we don't have photos of manananggal.
That
would be a first.
I mean, maybe someday. Yeah.
But I guess the idea behind having just Filipino creatures, at first it was a question of just having like visual representation of, hey guys, we have creatures too, there's more than just vampires and zombies, which are not even native necessarily to Canada, right? Like, yet they're so talked about. So we have stuff like the capre and the manananggal, and I realized the importance of these creatures beyond just visually, in that to this day, these creatures influence a lot of our mannerisms and even in our expressions. So I guess an example of that is we would say tabi tabi po if ever we pee on a bush, because we're letting creatures know that, hey, we're going to pee in this bush. So, letting you guys know. But also when it comes to like not being able to talk about it too, because I asked my mom about aswang or, just to give me ideas for the book. And she was like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. Maybe ask your grandma, because I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. So for them, it's still very real. And I thought that was important to kind of address.
Yeah. Despite it being mythological, it's part of your mythology.
Well, it might be mythological to me, but for them, it's still real, right?
Yeah.
So.
Is it kind of similar for the creatures on Easter Island for you?
Yes. The book's called Barua Rabbanui. It's spirits of Rabbanui. Rabbanui, Easter Island. It means Grand Island, Big Island. And the spirits are two, and there's the characters who tell the story. And Easter Island, there is a tradition who maybe you have to ask permission to talk about them and to maybe, for example, the spirits, it's an animist culture, and maybe all the caves, all the volcanoes, all the beach has a mythological or a spirit who is the owner of this location. And for me, it's very important to take permission to these spirits. It's called Ibi. He signifies bone, hueso. And the other one, it's a turtle, which who signifies Honu and Ibi, who maybe there is not a such thing of bad or good spirits. It's only spirits who wants to people to come to the island, and the other one doesn't want people in the island. And it's the contrast between these two that that the story develops and continue.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'm guessing you found this all kind of through your research as an anthropologist and things like, or like you learned about them.
When I was a child, there is a story. When I was a child, there was a story about a young girl. It's not me. Other young girl, who doesn't ask permission to the spirit from a cave, and she was asleep, and she entered to the cave. She had asleep, and in the sleep it's out from the cave. She doesn't remember how happened, but all the people say it's a spirit. You don't mess with the spirit because they want you out the cave. Yeah, and things happen like this all the time. And for me it was like my childhood, and also like the social anthropology said, it's true or not, but it's real for me, and since that they will always been real for me.
Yeah, I feel like you and Allan kind of have that in common a little bit, where it's like it's real, like kind of. It's like it's real enough, or it's real in a different way. Yes. But maybe Kikuo, for you, when you do, like, I was gonna maybe like do a little contrast between like, they researched, but it sounds to me like they kind of lived through it a lot too. But did you have to do any like research for your book, or
for this last one? Let me see.
Is it mostly also just like your memories, like the same as these two, where it's just like, I already lived it, why do I need to research?
Yeah, to a large degree. I'll say that when I did do a mythological work, that was a ton of research in the best possible way. They were stories that I grew up with, but one of the beauty, and listening to the way you described like neither good nor bad, but like either they want you or they don't. It's I love that so much, and those kind of. The beauty of those myths, for me at least, was like it tells you so much about the place. You know, it tells you so much about reading about Maui and the Big Island, of Hawaii, where the myth took place. For this book, there was the only kind of historical or larger contextual part was the sugarcane industry, which that's on the fire on the cover. So. The way they harvest sugarcane, or they did harvest sugarcane in Hawaii, was they would actually burn the entire fields, acres of light them on fire, and that would just reduce the entire crop to just the sugary stalks, and it'd be easier to harvest that way. And I grew up watching these enormous fires and just not thinking about it. And then when I was about in my mid-30s, I was sitting up on a hill watching it burn and be like, this is crazy. I just felt compelled to draw the fires, and that eventually became the book. And then a year later, they ended the sugarcane. The whole industry ended in 2016. So end of 180 years of industrial agriculture ended in 2016. And that was kind of, that was when I was like, okay, that's a story I really want to tell. So so I researched some of the sugarcane.
Just a little bit of sugarcane.
A little bit of sugarcane stuff. But that's also like, my grandmother was born on a plantation, so it's like that's also part of that. Yeah,
it's lived culture.
Exactly.
Like,
that's
so just like the myths and stuff like that, it kind of comes down through your lived experience one way or the other, like, and it informs maybe how people in the area think, or how they, the stories they tell their kids, the stories, you know, even again the little superstitions where it's just like, well, we don't go in that cave or whatever. Like, you definitely got to say something if you pee in this bush. Like, no, don't forget. I don't, you know, maybe it's not true, but I'm gonna do it anyway, like just to be sure, just in case. So
I think also what's kind of interesting is that beyond just learning from like my parents or other Filipinos, the personal research allows you for critical thinking when it comes to how these creatures might have evolved with time. So although the manananggal is common in a lot of Southeast Asian cultures actually, after colonization happened, the manananggal kind of picked up its own role.
A different meaning.
Yeah. So this creature is meant to keep you at homes and to blame witch doctors, you know, just to be able to control villages and stuff. So it's nice to have these different perspectives to be able to really understand who this creature is now. Yeah. And I think what's amazing with a lot of, at least Filipinos back home, is they're repurposing the creature and they're making manananggal sexy, like how vampires are sexy now. You know what I mean? Like, it was a matter of time too, because as much as we like to romanticize or just like reach out to our heritage, it's nice that in other parts of the world they're actually evolving the character, you know, making them badass, making them more progressive. I don't know, like it's evolving.
Using them to symbolize different things, like how you're using, you know, the spirits to talk about also colonization and Easter Island, or the sugarcane fields to talk about changing times and whatever new life there it has to be lived once old life dies, etc.
It's like a culture, I think. A culture is dead if it doesn't evolve, and it's the same thing for the creatures on the folklore or the mythology, and also even the language. I talked with Kikuo recently. The Easter Island Rabbanui language, it's about a melange, a mix. From Tahiti, from France also, from the Dutch, from Holland, from Spanish also. And there is a lot of different words that the people, maybe the Barua, it's a Tahiti word. The Rapanui word is kuhane. But nobody says kuhane nowadays. All the people says Barua. And we took the decision to occupy a word that is talked today, like Barua, not kuhane, for example.
Is there, so with all this sort of like knowledge that you have about your background, is there like any pressure when you write to like get it right? You know, like, I'm sure there, I mean, I'm asking that, I know the answer is yes, but like the pressure, you know, you want to get it right. You want, like, you know it's right because it's your lived experience, but obviously when you put a book about your heritage out in the world, everyone else of the same heritage is looking at it and thinking, hey, is this me? And, you know, there's a lot of pressure to reach out, maybe. But what if there is that pressure? What do you do to sort of relieve that pressure? Like, what do you say to yourself as an artist or a writer to be like, you put it out, it's not that big of a deal? Because I know that the pressure can get to a lot of POC artists, a lot of writers, especially diaspora writers, about getting it right.
At least for me, I've looked into the creatures, and you know, I feel like I have a strong understanding of them, and because of that, I gave myself permission to change them. So actually, I'm not so by the book. Yeah, I'm not so by the book about it, because hundreds of people have been by the book about it. And because of my background, like I studied biochemistry, and I wanted to like, how can I make it logical for a manananggal to exist, right? So, maybe it's this type of physiology, whatever. So I put myself into that creature too. So it's not just about being by the book about it. Again, we're trying to make it maybe more relatable or more relevant to what's happening these days. Yeah.
For me, I have a lot of criticism because we choose one specific legend to tell, and a lot of people say, because why you don't choose another one on this one is more pretty or more I don't know, exciting. And for me it was, I choose the legend that have sense to me, and I want to talk about the story who has sense to me, and I only speak to, for me. Maybe it's not, I don't want to speak for another culture, because all the different inhabitants of the island has different opinions and different tastes and different maybe beliefs. And it's for that that I have to choose one. I choose the one who likes a lot or who likes more, and wrote about it.
It's such a good question, and it's such a thing. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think at least after the last few years in America, with so much division and a racial reckoning, it's only become more tricky, I think. And funnily, the wisest thing, or the thing that I really took to heart, I heard years ago, I was listening to an interview with Andre 3000 of Outkast, the rapper Andre 3000. And for those that don't know Andre 3000, he's from Atlanta, and it's a duo. And one guy's like the hard rapper, and he wears like the real hard clothes. And then Andre 3000 wears wild, like super weird fashion, just outrageous, like hey ya, you guys know.
Yeah.
Sound like an old man. You guys know Outkast. But and Andre 3000 was being interviewed, and he said, just the simple line was, the best way to represent where you're from is to be completely yourself. And that was just so wise, and it gave me a lot of permission. It's just like, just try to, if you're saying something true to yourself, then someone else it's gonna register with somebody else. And it is scary. The scariest experience I had with it was, I as you mentioned, sometimes I do a cover for the New Yorker. And I got a call from the editor there 2 days after a shooting in Georgia where 6 Asian women, 8 women altogether were killed in an act of hate. And I got the call, and the question was, do you have an idea for this cover? And I was out to lunch on a Sunday, and I was like, yes, of course, I will get you sketches tomorrow. And the turnaround is Tuesday, so it has to be finished by Tuesday. And the minute I hung up the phone, I was like, "Oh my God! Like, what? Not only,
What have I done?
What have I done? Like, not only am I not sure if I have an idea for this. Like, am I the right and this is, I think, the heart of your question. Yeah. Am I the right person to do this?
Right.
Am I Asian enough? Am I too male? Right. This was after a tragedy where 8 women died. And those are moments when I'm really grateful to have like a good editorial staff, where I just sent them I sent them like 10 different sketches, 10 different ideas. And the one they chose was the one where my mom was going to do a visit, and my mom looks a lot like the women who I would see. I read every single story, watched every video. It was really tough research. And she looks a lot like many of the women that were being stomped in the street. And so I drew, back to Andre 3000, I just drew the situation that I could imagine my mom in, which was just nervous on a subway platform late at night with a subway delay. And that just felt real. And that's what the editors chose. And the morning that it went live on social media, I turned off my phone, because I thought that, like, what if I said the wrong thing? Yeah. Or like, who have I offended, and who did I speak for in the wrong way? And I didn't want to see. And the exact opposite happened. I got like the most touching. I get emotional thinking about it. I get the most touching emails from people that say that they felt seen. And but yeah, it's sketchy. It's scary.
Hard. So in short, be yourself. Second, turn off your phone.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, those are great advice for relieving for life in general. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about maybe the form of the comic. So Berna, your comics, I was looking through them. I'm really sorry I can't read Spanish, so I was just sort of like visually trying to absorb as much as I could, but the layouts, other than being really beautiful, kind of have the sense of like grandeur and sort of like reaching across time, right? Like not just about going back in time, but also in the sense of like, different events happen, they're attacked or whatever, and then it feels like many things are happening at once and the moment is slowed down. So that's sort of what I mean by reaching through time. And I feel like that's a visual device that's really like unique to comics. And of course you're the writer as well, so it's like, did you choose comics for a reason, or that maybe something film or other media or even prose, just like writing a novel couldn't do, or even writing like a essay, like a research essay or something? Why did you choose comics, I guess?
Because I love comic books. It's the easy one. But no, I think maybe, for example, the colors and the panels. And also, it's a very wonderful medium to show, for example, the tattoos or the corporal paint, or, for example, the faces, and tell a story with the words, of course, but with the pictures also. And I think it's a very good mix between them. And for me, it was a way to show people, for example, the hats, for example, the vêtements,
clothing.
And this, all this stuff, it's in the island today. And maybe the people think, oh, it's a very, very long time ago, there's nothing to do with the island today, but the people always has the same tattoos, the same hats, the same, and it's beautiful because I think it's changed, but also not at all.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that in the comic book.
Yeah. And what about you two? Did you choose comics to tell your story for any particular reason? Because like obviously there's Kikuo, you do a lot of illustration as well. There's other mediums you could have maybe chosen. So
yeah, I just love comics so much. To quote Berna, this particular story, I'll quote a Canadian great cartoonist. Is this man controversial? I'm not sure. Chester Brown.
No, he's fine.
He's fine? Okay.
I think he's okay.
Not sure.
You never know.
Yeah. I've heard him say that what he loves about comics is the silence and the stillness. And that just resonates with me so much. And because that is also what I love about comics. I love the experience of looking at a still image for a very long time and deciphering its meaning based on what it's next to. Like just the experience of reading comics is wonderful. And it's a story about grief and with humor. I always have to throw that in. It seemed there was a lot of silence. There's the three characters in the book never say what they actually think or feel. It's all implied in the gutter, as they say in a comic. And that was kind of, the comic just really, the format really suited the story, I felt. Yeah.
And Allan, yeah. I feel like I know your answer why you chose Manananggal, because it's not real, but it's also real, but it's not real. So I feel like that's. But go ahead.
Well, I guess when it comes to just drawing, it's a lot more easy to receive, at least for youth, you know.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, when you see a drawing, I guess people just think it's for kids, and I'm just taking advantage of how people think about comics, in that I try to have difficult issues in the book, but trying to reach kids with these issues, either through masking it in a cartoon format, right, or just by the symbolism, right, using Manananggal to represent whatever that may be. So.
Yeah, comics are really accessible.
Yeah, so it's the accessibility of comics, and if you can't find, the message within the illustration itself, then there's often a dialogue box, right, that can help you lead the story. Like I've met people who haven't read, a whole novel, but they would read a comic because it's just, there's less to read, right? And they like pictures. Yeah, it's real. So, like one of my friends actually has never bought a book in their lives, but because of I know it's weird. And this,
I mean, I hope they go to the library.
But like they were able to read Kazama because, if you just stick to the dialogue box, even if you're not paying attention to how much work we put into the illustrations, right? Like it's easily a lot more time, but at least they have the text that helps them, at least that leads them in the story. So
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So when I read No One Else, maybe this is just me, and maybe it says more about me than anything, but I relate a lot to Brandon, the kid character of the three sort of four-ish main characters in the book. And I had a curiosity where I was like, how much of this did Kikuo take from his own life, like how kind of autobiographical it was, and also to me he felt like he was the protagonist, but maybe that's maybe more me than whatever, but like to me he was the protagonist. And then I also wanted to know why you would have chosen that character as a protagonist.
Thank you, that's a generous question. So there are three characters, and it's funny, everybody chooses who's the protagonist, who they connect to most.
Exactly. I had a feeling. I was like, it's me, isn't it? I'm just
No. I do think that Brandon, the young boy in the book, is the kind of emotional heart of the book. And I'm sure there's a lot of cartoonists in the room right now, and so maybe you all can connect to this, where so my first book came out in 2005. This one came out last year. So there's a long gap. And I abandoned a lot of projects, and I have a lot of guilt and shame about that. But the good news is that all the best ideas from those 4 abandoned projects ended up in this 100-page little book. So if anyone's frustrated in the audience, it's like I feel so much guilt. I got to finish this, but I don't have enough time to do my work or whatever. Just the good ideas will remain. I promise. The best ideas will remain if you stick at it, or at least that was my experience. And Brandon was one of those old ideas where I found that, back to the silence and stillness thing, I just found that those kind of, something that at least in the comics I was making that seemed to work the best on the page was when when their thoughts and emotions were implied as opposed to spoken outright, at least in my writing. And a child doesn't use his words, as the expression goes. A child is much more likely to express or communicate with their hands or through actions, or they're just less verbal. And having a child experience it's almost, Rashomon is an overused cliche, and it's not like that at all, but it's like you see the same grief from 3 perspectives, and the child's version of it is not expressed through words at all. And so that's why it was important to me. That was an idea from an old book, but to have a child main character, that even in a book that I really wanted to make a book that felt adult, but even with a child character, yeah.
I think you succeeded. I think that even though to me the protagonist was him, as a kid I wouldn't know how to interpret his feelings. Yeah. As an adult I can see it and be like, oh, I get it. But I don't know, if I was his age and reading this book, I'd be like, what is this book? It's not a comic, it's for old people. So I think you succeeded.
My 11-year-old niece was like, I read it, I don't know what it means.
Perfect. Yeah, so I know it was maybe even less obvious for both of your books here. Like Allan, you kind of have 2 main characters, 2 protagonists, so to speak. And Berna, you kind of, all the people of Easter Island are the protagonists. And of course, from each book too, it's like it follows different stories each time. So who do you consider the protagonists that you relate to the most, and why you chose them, if you choose them, or not? Like maybe you don't choose them. You're like, no.
Oh, that's interesting.
Can't Sophie's choice this? I gotta do well. Give me both or whatever.
It's funny in terms of this is just even pre-production, just thinking about who I'm gonna make a main character, what that situation would be. So I attend these like drawing meetups, and you know, you're just chilling and you're sharing ideas and whatever. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking of writing this comic book, and I was just talking to this really casual person drawing, and the guy was from Syria. And I asked him, so are there like comic books there? Like, what's the situation, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh no, we don't. Well, this was his perspective. I didn't look into it, but he was like, no, there's no superheroes there. We don't believe that one person can save the world. And I was like, damn.
Mic drop.
Better add another one.
Yeah, and especially in the groups that I frequent here in Montreal, right? It's not one person doing all the work. It's a team effort, right? The whole concept of Kazama is companionship, togetherness, allyship.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to have more than one person highlighted. And in terms of choosing who that person is, it's impossible for me to choose because like both characters are named after my nieces. That adds that extra level of connection.
We won't put you in that spot then. Okay, both is good. Both is fine.
But I guess they do represent different elements of myself in that one person is trying to figure things out and the other person is a lot more radical. And I'm, trying to balance that within me as well.
Yeah,
so.
The traditional versus less traditional, or wanting to change and wanting to express yourself or whatever.
For me, it's an easy one because there is a two-spirit who tell the story. There's three stories at this time. One is Evie, is the bone. It's a grumpy old skeleton who lives in a volcano.
Oh, that one's me.
And me.
Yeah, me. Yeah.
And the other one, it's a turtle, a sea turtle, who it's a symbol of good luck in Easter Island. When the people see turtles in the sea,
they're
it's
like,
a good time because there is a good weather for the island.
I see.
I think it's a symbol, maybe in Hawaii too.
Honu.
Yes, and Honu, and it's the good. It's not the good one, but it's more like welcoming and the good luck, and it's very grounded and very like a grandfather, I think, and I like it, but I like the
like
other one
volcano.
more.
You're like, that's me. You're like, yeah, I'll stay in this volcano. Don't touch my volcano. Yeah. So now I'm like, should I ask this last question that I wrote, or is it too huge? I think I'm just gonna leave it to the audience afterwards. But I'm gonna ask you maybe a little bit about what you're working on next. I know. Allan, you wanted to talk about your zine that you're doing, because you've got your Filipino side and your Montrealer Canadian sort of side as well. Yeah, what are you working on next?
So this is obviously a fantasy story, but like I've been working on a zine that talks about my experiences as a Filipino Montrealer. So I highlight personal experiences as well as just talking about the neighborhood, talking about Uptown, right? And I feel like this also a part of me that is just more grounded, right, as opposed to hiding everything in symbolism in this book. So feel free to check me out in my booth, A14.
A14. I have everything written down. I'll remind everyone again.
I working in the fourth. It's the last one, the fourth comic book. Yes, it's a story it's very important to me. It's about an English archaeologist, a woman, who worked in Easter Island in the, I think, 100 years ago. It was one of the first female archaeologists who worked in Easter Island. And she made a friend with a shaman, with a priestess in the Easter Island, and there is a revolution, and the archaeologist took a side with the priestess, and it was very, very hard. It was very, very hard because the husband from the archaeologist took her to England, and all his field work is lost because the husband says she was a very independent woman and took her to an asylum, a psychiatric asylum. Wow. And all his work was lost for, I think, 50 years. And then another one, a woman who find this field work, the notes of camp, or the books, and bring it to the Royal Society of London. And they said, it's wonderful. It's the first time, for example, on the statues, the Moais, it's all registered, and she took drawings and all stuff. And I want to talk about her. Yes,
because if not for her, maybe we wouldn't know nearly as much about Easter Island than what we found out.
Her work was amazing, and I think I wanna bring justice to his memory, because it's very important to people. I think know about her.
Yeah,
about the priestess also.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Kikuo, what are you working on next?
My next project will be to learn Spanish so I can read that story. It sounds amazing. I am working on some projects.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, cannot. NDA. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll see your work at the New Yorker.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully
And
soon.
then also, so Kikuo is also in another panel later today at 2:30 called Living Cities. And we'll be signing more or less throughout the weekend at Planète BD at B32 and at Drawn and Quarterly's table, B17.
There'll be the French edition at
Planète BD.
Planète BD, and then the English edition and my other book at Quarterly.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Yeah, and then Berna is going to be at the Chile booth, which she's abandoned to be here today. So she'll be there all the time the rest of this time.
In the afternoon.
Yeah, in the afternoon at B20.
B20.
Yeah. And Allan, as he said, will be at A14. Please pick up Kazama and check out what him and his friends have going on, because he's a big community leader. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. So that is my 45 minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience? And here, maybe I can take this out and pass you a mic so that it can be recorded. Yes? Okay. Who would like to go first? Anybody? Bueller? No questions. Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, good thing I saved one question. Well, we got a hand. We've got a... No.
No.
I'm wrapped up. Hang on.
Oh, it looks like we got one. Looks like we got one.
Oh, okay. Oh, we got a... Okay, perfect.
How about now? Is that working?
Oops.
No. If you shout it out, we can repeat it.
Shout it out, but I don't think it'll get recorded.
I'll repeat it.
Oh, yeah, you can repeat it? All
Yeah.
right. No, I was just interested in, like, the topic's about heritage, and I'm interested in the interplay between heritage and home for you guys. So, like, 2 out of 3 of you don't live in the place that you wrote about, so that's an interesting decision. And then even yourself, Allan, I think you mentioned at some point during the talk, like, back home in the Philippines. So I'm just interested, like, maybe an easy way to do it is to think of, like, what motivates you as an artist, or what motivates you as a person more, like home or heritage. Maybe you could reflect on that.
Yeah, so just to repeat, what motivates you more as an artist, the idea of home or the idea of heritage, and what the difference is for you between those two things?
For me, it's a tough one because I grew up there. I lived 10 years, and I came back in March 2020, and this a different one. It's not the island that I remember, and maybe for Allan also is I think it's the idea of the island that I have today, because it's not like this today in the real life, and also because I live as a child. Also, I think I have it's not an illusion, but it's I think it's an imaginary island, because for me it was the sea is another thing than a sea, and the trees is a different thing from a tree, and I think I return all the time in this idea of the island that I remember. It's not the real one, and for me it's the reason that I want to talk about this island. this idea of an island. Yes.
So are you team heritage or home?
Yeah, I don't know, I feel like that's such a huge question.
It's a great question.
When I think about it, like, it's not about one or the other. A big part of it is how heritage influences home. Because ultimately, I'm here, right? Like, I'm Canadian, right? But not just heritage, right? It's also how history, it's not just about the food or the music or the dancing, it's also history, like what happened to the Philippines and what are the systems that got us here in Canada to begin with, right? So, and how that influences home and how that is influencing the people now. So, yeah, like, I guess also a scary part about focusing too much about heritage is I feel like a lot of people, when they talk about their heritage, maybe it becomes more of a, like, I used it before, this word, but romanticization of or even orientalization of their culture. And, like, at least for me, it's not about, like, I'm trying to navigate those lines, right? Because for me, it's, how did we get here? Why are we this way? Why are my parents in that neighborhood? Why are there so many Filipinos in Canada? Like, what are the roles of the governments have to do with my home? So for me, it's more that.
And not became a cliche, I think. Not became a cliche because it's very easy to only focus in one thing. For example, I don't know, the language or the food or the music, but it's a more plural thing for not to focus on only one, I think.
Yeah, that was well said. I think about this question a lot. It's such a good question. And I think part of it is that, like, home is a relative idea. For example, if I was traveling around Europe and somebody asked me where I'm from, I'd probably say New York. But if I'm in New York and somebody asks me where I'm from, I say Hawaii. So it's relative. And also, whenever I spend about a month every year in Hawaii or more, and I always say, well, I'm going home. And part of it is that's where my family is. The other part of it is that living in Brooklyn is so dehumanizing. It's hard to consider, like, a rat-infested trash pile a home. Brooklyn's great, represent. But it's an interesting question, and I think heritage is more like less static, right? Heritage it stays, or rather it's like one thing. It stays in one place more. It's also probably relative, but it's an interesting question. I don't know if I can split those two, but yeah.
Okay, so once again, team both.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
bad answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, any other questions over here? Over there, okay.
Hi. Okay. Thank you for your touching anecdotes and point of view. I was moved, as maybe you saw. My question is, when you draw, you illustrate, you share a story through the drawings, what is your take on the language? For example, I'm sorry, I have yet to read all your work, so now I'm very curious. But how is your take on the language you use in your stories, or the absence? Because sometimes there are no words; it's only images and following the events. So, what is your take, either in general or in regards to your actual work presented here? I don't know if my question was clear.
I think it's clear.
Yeah,
because you can answer it both metaphorically, or you can answer it as, like, literally, like, when I write another language in a comic, what do I do? Yeah.
I think of it a lot like I think of the words in my books a lot like the caption underneath, like a gag cartoon in the New Yorker or something, where there'll be a picture and then there's like a phrase underneath it, and if you just read the phrase, it wouldn't be funny at all, and if you just saw the picture, it's not funny, but somehow the combination of the two is like this magic third thing that is more powerful. And so I see them very tied together. It's hard for me to think of them separate, but also there's no like narration in this book. It's all dialogue. So I feel a lot of times like if I can, the goal is to get a dialogue balloon down to like one word. If I can get it down to one word, then I did it. Yeah.
I guess for me, when it comes to choosing which language to use, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but like within the Philippines, there are so many different minority groups, and I kind of generalized between one character being from Luzon and another character being more from the South, Mindanao. And so although it's written in English because the audience is mostly for people here, when it comes to just raw emotion, then I would express it in what it would be the tongue of the region, right? So it's gonna sound cheesy, but like when they swear, that's like a real raw emotion, and it wouldn't be appropriate to give an English swear because, you know, the words don't perfectly translate, right? Like for example, in Cebuano, when they swear, they like yell out an organ, right? So I'm not gonna yell out liver. It doesn't make sense. But for a Cebuano, that's a swear. So it really depends on that particular situation.
I remember reading Kazama and also being like, oh, there's tons of like Tagalog works in here, and I'm like, a lot of non-explanation too, which I was just like, you know, at some point I was just like, whatever, I don't need to know it. I get the like gist of it or the context.
Fills
Yeah,
it in.
exactly.
But also in my head I was like, do you know how much Shakespeare I've read and like how they don't explain anything in Shakespeare? And I'm like, if you're gonna make me go through Shakespeare, like you can look up what I don't know, one word.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
For me, I wanna occupy some words in Rabbanui that it's also important to the people. For example, thank you, Maururu, or like expression of politesse. Because the kindness, or yes, because it's very important to say these words correctly, and there are words that's not that they use all the time, and I wanna use them, and also to let the people who speak only Spanish to know them, to know their words. Yes.
Yeah. And maybe one last question. Maybe two, depending on how fast everybody responds. Actually, yeah, maybe two. I think two questions. We're going to go a little over time. They told me it was okay.
I'll just come closer. Thank you again. This is more for Kikuo. How does your teaching impact your work? Do you learn lots from your students? Is it distracting? I'm also a teacher, so I'm curious.
Oh, that's a great question. So I have been teaching at my alma mater in Rhode Island. I go live there in the winter since 2009, and that has been it's been so good for my practice actually, mostly because you are constantly bombarded with comics that don't work. And you have to, it's my job to like diagnose why they're not effective. And so I have like years of reading, you know, trying to help students like find their thing. And the best thing that I've discovered over the years just as a teacher is that like the most useful practice that I do with them is I have their comic, and I go through it panel by panel, and I say, I just read them their comic. I describe what's in the images, and I just read it to them. Kids are smart. They're the author, and they typically don't need me to tell them it's broken. If I read it to them and I'm not getting what they want out of it, they know it's broken, and they know how to fix it. And that exercise to see to see their face and like how they react to that, I cannot express how just how helpful that is. Also, reading comics. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Do you? I mean, if you guys have any teaching stuff, because I know you're an academic to a certain degree, you did research, and then Allan, maybe within your community, within the sort of Filipino community that reads your book, Do you feel like you're teaching anything, and if they're teaching you anything?
Yeah, so in general, like I do give like art workshops and stuff, and just I've been lucky enough to be in so many platforms recently because of the book and other things. Teaching just allows you to be able to simplify what you're trying to teach to make it more concise, because and it makes you kind of master what you're trying to share also. So the more you do get to express and share and have a platform, the more comfortable you are with the subject, and that brings about obviously confidence in what you're saying, and it just makes things sound more believable or correct. I don't know.
For me, it's maybe a cliche, but also I think I get like a teacher. As a teacher, I learn a lot about the students and these questions and these forms of think maybe. For example, I teach about Easter Island, about the language of that, and the people ask a lot of things that it's very weird. I think it's like maybe I don't know, and also say I don't know to the student. It's very very important, I think, because the teacher doesn't know us all. I think it's not an ideal. We have to have a space to learn everything or to learn every day from the students, from the books that I read, all that. Yes,
that's really nice, because I think saying I don't know as a professor is also a way of inviting the student to look into something with you. Like,
yes, yes, and learning as a collective process also, not only a solitary one. I think that's
very nice. So poetic. Yeah. All right, so one last question. Who would like to go? Anybody? I can. Okay, perfect.
It's more about the craft. I guess you all mentioned that comics was the medium that drew you to the storytelling that you want to do. How'd you get started? Basically, like going from that step. Was there a step, or I don't know? I'd like to hear your experiences.
So a lot of it, I actually wasn't planning on necessarily writing a comic. It was more like, so I work in video games, and I was working on my portfolio, and oftentimes the themes in at least video game portfolio, or even just movie portfolios, it's often very similar visual languages or similar themes. Like, I don't know, just paint a Viking or paint a samurai or paint a ninja, right? Like, that's what's hot right now. That's probably gonna get you a job, to be honest. But like, I wasn't interested in that, so I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll look into Filipino stuff. So it started with that. Wanted to learn more, picked up books, joined different organizations in Montreal, and then eventually I was like, and I've always been drawing, right? So eventually I was like, how do I communicate what I've learned to other people in an accessible way? And like, I just started drawing different, like, just scenes, like, oh, this happened in the Philippines. I was in like a tourist bus with all these different tourists, and they're talking about the Philippines, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. That's kind of fucked up. I'll write that down. And like, how do I compile all these different experiences into a narrative? And that's Kazama, basically. Yeah. And of course, I took like comic book courses in Montreal. Good Sam is a great teacher, Max. He has a table too. So.
For me, what's a dream? I dream literally about the story. And maybe in the Easter Island, there is a tradition that dreams are very important. Maybe it's an obligation, if you dream about something, to tell about the people, and or maybe have a comic or make a comic book. And for me, it was that. For a long time, I don't wanna talk about Easter Island. I don't wanna because I think the people is bored about the story about Easter Island all the time, and I think, yeah, okay, I don't want to talk about it. But I has this dream, and I think maybe it's an obligation, but also a giving one for the community and for the spirits also. And I start with idea with the characters about these two spirits, and yes, a lot of research also.
Mm-hmm.
There is a research, not only the experience. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that.
You led with this is a question about craft. Can you dig into that question just a little bit more? Was there a specific, like, how do you gain the skills to draw comics? Is that the question, or no?
It's however your approach, because I know you all had a different approach to the craft itself. So I knew I was going to get probably different answers from each of you. So yeah, it was like, it's one thing to admire comics or want to do them, but then you still have to face the blank page. And what are you already bringing to it? Like Allan, your answer was good. You kind of explained it was like very organic in certain ways, but I expected a different probably answer from each of you.
Gotcha. It's a big question. I drew my first comic when I was 9, and I wanted to draw Wolverine. This is
nice.
My best Wolverine. Batman actually is in this comic in a way.
That's true.
Yeah, Batman is a character in this comic, kind of. And I just never stopped until I got to art school, when I decided that I should do real art and prove to the world that I can paint like John Singer Sargent, which I can't. And then by my junior year, I was like, wait, the reason I fell in love with drawing when I was a kid was to use my imagination and tell stories, which I think what a lot of kids like about drawing, actually. But that's, especially back then, was frowned upon more. Comics are more embraced now. Mm-hmm. And I started my first graphic novel while I was in college, and then graduated and spent 2 years waiting tables in Times Square and drawing under a lofted bed in a room I shared with 4 men. And finished that book and sent it to Fantagraphics, which was my dream publisher, and it was published, and then started getting illustration jobs after that. That's kind of the career path.
Well, side question for you then, if I can sneak it in.
Please.
You took that, you also mentioned you had a huge gap in between your books.
Yes.
Was it different coming back to it after such a long gap?
Yeah, it was very different, mostly because I just had, a lot of it was the teaching, like years of teaching, and my tolerance for tedium just goes so far down when you're reading like unreadable comics for years. I also steal a lot from my students. They're brilliant, but it's not to say that they're bad. But so when I came back and drew this comic, it was like, it feels like a more generous, I don't know if readers feel this way, but to me it felt more like you're buying a ticket to a ride, as opposed to my first book, which was like, check out my emotions. I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but I felt this feels more like a generous writing experience, right?
Uh-huh.
I've heard George Saunders, who I'm a big fan of, a fiction writer, talk about how it was when he actually tried to be a little funny, and stopped trying to be an artist and started trying to entertain people, that his writing became good. And I see that as a shift in my own work.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of the panel. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
And yeah, please check out these artists. Allan, table A14, Berna, table B20, and our Kikuo at Planet BD, B32, and D&Q, B17. And later today, I don't know if it's this room, I forgot to write it down, but another panel, Living Cities. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.